conversation with Bob or something. Like, would we be having...
The sun hung low in the California sky, casting a warm, golden glow over the cul-de-sacs of Willow Creek, a quiet suburban neighborhood nestled in the dry, rolling hills just outside Sacramento. It was the kind of place where kids rode bikes until dusk, where neighbors waved over picket fences, and where the hum of lawnmowers was as regular as a heartbeat. But beneath the idyllic surface, there was a tension brewing, one that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with a 4,000-gallon steel water tank that now sat behind my house. I'm Jake Tanner, an off-duty firefighter with the county and a volunteer with the Regional Emergency Task Force. I've seen what wildfires can do, how they turn entire communities to ash in hours, and I wasn't about to let that happen here. Not if I could help it. But as I stood in my backyard, wiping sweat from my brow and admiring the tank I'd just hauled in, I had no idea that this piece of equipment was about to ignite a different kind of fire, one fueled by bureaucracy, ego, and a woman named Karen who thought a manicured lawn was worth more than our safety. It was a Thursday afternoon, 2 days before the wildfire would start creeping over the northern hills, and the air was still crisp with that powdery blue clarity you only get in early fall. I'd spent the morning maneuvering a flatbed trailer through the narrow streets of Willow Creek, the tank strapped down like a sleeping giant. Getting it here was no small feat. The thing weighed a ton, literally, and I'd had to call in a favor from Reggie, a buddy at the firehouse who knew how to handle heavy equipment. The tank was a miracle of bureaucracy, a rare win in a world of red tape. I'd spent months navigating the county's wildfire readiness program, filling out forms, attending meetings, and making my case to skeptical officials who didn't always see the point of investing in a neighborhood like ours. Willow Creek wasn't exactly Malibu or the Hollywood Hills. We were middle class, unassuming, the kind of place where people worked hard and kept their heads down. But I knew better than most that fire didn't care about your zip code. One spark, one dry gust of wind, and this whole place could go up like a matchstick. The program I'd tapped into was a pilot initiative, one that offered subsidized emergency equipment to high-risk areas. Our region was a tinderbox, miles of brittle chaparral, eucalyptus trees that burned like gasoline, and a history of fires that had come too close for comfort. Just 3 years ago, a blaze had roared through a neighboring town, leveling 40 homes and forcing hundreds to evacuate. I'd been on the front lines then, hauling hose lines through choking smoke, watching families lose everything. That memory stuck with me, a constant reminder of what was at stake. So when the county approved the tank for placement behind my house, I felt like I'd won the lottery. It wasn't just a piece of steel, it was a lifeline, a backup water supply that could buy us precious time if a fire broke out. 4,000 gallons might not sound like much, but in a wildfire, it could mean the difference between saving a street and losing it. I'd backed the trailer into my driveway, the tank's hulking frame casting a shadow across the patchy grass of my backyard. My house wasn't anything fancy, a single-story rancher with a sagging porch and a roof that needed new shingles, but it was home. More importantly, it was strategically positioned at the edge of the neighborhood, close to the open hills where fires were most likely to come from. The tank's placement wasn't random. I'd worked with the county's fire marshal to map out the best spot, somewhere it could feed into our makeshift suppression lines without obstructing access. It was temporary, technically, meant for wildfire response drills and emergencies, but I'd already started thinking about how to make it a permanent fixture. That is, until Karen showed up. Karen Mitchell was the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, a title she wore like a crown. If you've ever lived in an HOA neighborhood, you know the type, clipboard in hand, rules memorized like scripture, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Karen was in her late 40s, with a peroxide blonde bob and a wardrobe of pastel athleisure that screamed, "I'm in charge, and I'm loving it." She wasn't just strict, she was a dictator in flip-flops, the kind of person who'd fine you for leaving a trash can out 10 minutes past pickup time. Her mission in life was to keep Willow Creek looking like a postcard, no matter the cost. Lawn gnomes? Banned. Doorbell cameras? Only with written approval. Solar panels? Forget it, they disrupted the aesthetic cohesion. Karen's vision of perfection was a neighborhood frozen in time, every house a carbon copy of the next, every yard a testament to her control. And now, my water tank was her latest enemy. I was unhooking the trailer's safety chains when I heard the unmistakable clack-clack-clack of her flip-flops charging down the sidewalk. She was moving fast, like a flamingo on a warpath, her sunglasses perched aggressively on her forehead and a clipboard clutched in one manicured hand. Her face was already flushed, lips pursed into a thin line that told me this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. I straightened up, wiping my hands on my jeans, and braced myself. Karen didn't disappoint. What she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, is that monstrosity. She pointed at the tank like it was a nuclear warhead parked in my driveway. The word monstrosity hung in the air, dripping with disdain. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I dealt with Karen before last year. She tried to find me for parking my work truck in my own driveway, but this was different. This wasn't about a pickup truck or a slightly overgrown hedge. This was about lives. It's a water tank, Karen, I said, keeping my tone even. For 1,000 gallons, county approved, for wildfire response. Part of the emergency preparedness program. I gestured toward the paperwork clipped to the trailer's hitch, a thick stack of permits and approvals I'd spent weeks compiling. Happy to show you the documentation. She didn't even glance at the papers. Instead, she waved her hand dismissively, as if I'd offered her a used tissue. It's not aesthetic, she hissed, her eyes narrowing. It violates Section 3, Paragraph 9 of the HOA guidelines. No temporary storage units over 4 feet high. This thing is an eyesore, Jake, and it's not staying. I stared at her, my jaw tightening. An eyesore? We were sitting on a powder keg of dry brush and flammable trees, and she was worried about how a water tank looked? I tried to keep the frustration out of my voice, but it was hard. Karen, this is for wildfires. You know, those things that burn down half the state every year? The county signed off on it. It's going behind my house, not even visible from the street. Visible to me, she snapped, as if her personal line of sight was the ultimate arbiter of HOA law. She took a step closer, her flip-flops slapping the pavement, and jabbed a finger toward the tank. This is my neighborhood, Jake, and I won't have it looking like an industrial dump. You have 24 hours to remove it, or we will. I blinked, caught off guard by the threat. You'll remove it? I said, my voice low. Karen, this isn't a garden shed. It's registered emergency equipment. You can't just tow it. Watch me, she said, her smile cold and triumphant. She spun on her heel and marched back toward her house, her clipboard swinging like a guillotine. I stood there, hands clenched, watching her disappear around the corner. A part of me wanted to laugh, tow a 4,000-gallon water tank? Good luck with that. But another part, the part that had seen Karen's pettiness in action, knew she wasn't bluffing. She had connections, or at least she thought she did. Her husband was some mid-level city official, and she loved name-dropping him at HOA meetings. If she wanted that tank gone, she'd find a way to make it happen. I went inside, grabbing a beer from the fridge and sinking into my couch. The paperwork for the tank was spread out on the coffee table, a testament to the months I'd spent fighting for it. I talked to every neighbor on the block, explaining the plan, getting their buy-in. Most of them were on board. Rosa, the single mom across the street, had even offered to help maintain the hoses. Mr. Thompson, the retired mechanic down the cul-de-sac, had clapped me on the back and called it damn smart. Even Elaine, who worked night shifts at the hospital, had texted me a thumbs-up emoji when I told her about it. Everyone saw the value in being prepared. Everyone, that is, except Karen. The thing about Karen wasn't just her obsession with rules. It was her need for control. She didn't just enforce the HOA bylaws. She wielded them like a weapon, picking and choosing which ones to apply based on her mood or her grudges. Last summer, she'd gone after Rosa for planting wildflowers in her front yard. Wildflowers, for God's sake, claiming they attracted undesirable insects. Meanwhile, Karen's own lawn was a chemical green masterpiece, watered daily despite the drought restrictions. She called herself the Water Ethics Ambassador, a title she'd invented to justify her meddling. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was now trying to get rid of a water tank meant to save us all. I pulled up my laptop and started typing an email to the county's wildfire coordinator, a guy named Levi who'd been my point of contact for the program. I laid out the situation, HOA precedent threatening to remove emergency equipment, citing aesthetic violations. I attached scans of the permits and asked for advice. Levi replied within an hour, his message short but clear. That's insane. The tank's registered as critical infrastructure. If she touches it, she's breaking county law. Keep me posted. His words were reassuring, but they didn't erase the pit in my stomach. Karen wasn't the type to back down, and I had a bad feeling she was already plotting her next move. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me think of tow trucks pulling into my driveway, of Karen standing there with her smug grin as my tank was dragged away. I got up at dawn and checked the backyard. The tank was still there, its steel surface glinting in the morning light. I ran my hand along its side, feeling the cool metal under my fingers. It was more than a tool. It was a promise I'd made to my neighbors, to myself. I wasn't going to let it go without a fight. The next morning, I was called into the fire station for an equipment audit. It was routine stuff, checking hoses, calibrating gauges, making sure our rigs were ready for the season. It was supposed to take 2 hours, tops. I left the house at 8 a.m., locking the gate to the backyard and double-checking the trailer's hitch. I told myself Karen wouldn't act that fast. She'd need time to organize, to call in her favors. I was wrong. When I got back at 10:30, the tank was gone. The patch of dirt where it had stood was empty, the grass crushed into tire tracks that led out to the street. A slip of paper fluttered in the breeze, taped to my front porch like a taunting note. I ripped it off and read the words, my blood pressure spiking with every syllable. Unauthorized structure removed per HOA code. No signature, no explanation, just a smug declaration of victory. I crumpled the paper in my fist and stormed toward Karen's house, 2 blocks away. Her SUV was parked in the driveway, sparkling clean as always, and she was out front, watering her lawn with a hose. The sight of her, casually spraying water while the neighborhood's backup supply was God knows where, was almost too much to handle. Karen. I called, my voice carrying across the street. She looked up, not a trace of surprise on her face. If anything, she looked pleased, like she'd been waiting for this moment. Oh, that, she said, flicking water at her petunias. It was towed this morning. You should have read your bylaws, Jake. Her tone was syrupy, laced with mock sympathy. I took a step closer, forcing myself to keep my hands at my sides. That tank was registered for emergency wildfire support, I said, my voice shaking with barely contained anger. It was sanctioned by the county. You just sabotaged our backup supply. Her eyebrows shot up, but her smile didn't falter. Well, maybe next time you'll think before parking industrial garbage in my view. She turned back to her flowers, dismissing me like I was a kid who'd tracked mud on her carpet. I stood there, my heart pounding, the weight of what she'd done sinking in. This wasn't just about a tank anymore. It was about every house on this block, every family who trusted me to keep them safe. Karen had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I pulled out my phone and dialed Levi, my eyes still locked on her as she hummed to herself, oblivious to the storm she'd just unleashed. The fire was coming, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And when it did, we'd need that tank. I wasn't going to stop until it was back where it belonged, and Karen was out of the picture for good. The morning after Karen had the water tank towed felt like the calm before a storm, but not the kind you could see on a weather radar. The air in Willow Creek was heavy, not with humidity, but with the weight of what had just happened. A 4,000-gallon lifeline, meant to protect our neighborhood from the wildfires that haunted California's dry seasons, was gone, snatched away by an HOA president who cared more about her pristine lawn than our survival. I'm Jake Tanner, an off-duty firefighter and the guy who'd fought tooth and nail to get that tank here in the first place. Standing in my backyard, staring at the patch of crushed grass where it used to be, I felt a mix of rage and betrayal. My neighbors trusted me to keep them safe, and now, because of Karen Mitchell's ego, we were defenseless. But I wasn't about to let her win. Not when the sky was already hinting at trouble, with faint wisps of smoke curling over the northern hills like a warning written in ash. It was Friday, and the neighborhood was still waking up. Kids were grabbing backpacks for school, and the usual parade of dog walkers shuffled along the sidewalks. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The powdery blue sky from yesterday was starting to gray, not with clouds, but with the kind of haze that only comes from fire. It wasn't close yet, maybe 10, 15 miles north, but I'd been through enough fire seasons to know that distance meant nothing when the winds kicked up. I pulled out my phone and checked the weather app. 20% humidity, gusts up to 25 miles an hour, and a red flag warning issued for the county. Perfect conditions for a blaze to turn into a monster. And here we were, without our backup water supply, all because Karen decided it didn't match her vision of suburban perfection. I headed inside, grabbing a coffee and trying to think through my next move. The violation notice from the HOA was still crumpled on my kitchen counter, a smug little trophy of Karen's power trip. I smoothed it out and read it again. Unauthorized structure removed per HOA code. No details, no contact number, just a slap in the face. I'd already called Levi, the county's wildfire coordinator, the night before, and he'd been as stunned as I was. She towed an emergency asset, he'd said, his voice crackling through the phone. That's not just stupid, Jake. That's illegal. I'll start making calls. But I knew how these things worked. Government wheels turn slowly, and with a fire creeping closer, we didn't have time to wait for memos and meetings. I needed to act, and I needed to act fast. My first stop was the security camera mounted on the side of my house. I'd installed it last year after Karen tried to fine me for excessive vehicle noise when I parked my work truck in my driveway. The camera wasn't fancy, just a basic model with a motion sensor, but it had a clear view of the backyard. I pulled up the footage on my laptop, my heart pounding as I scrubbed through the timestamps. Sure enough, at 3:12 a.m., there she was, Karen, in a tracksuit and flip-flops, waving a flashlight like she was directing a covert operation. Two guys in orange vests stood next to a tow truck, nodding as she pointed at the tank and gestured wildly. The kicker? She paused to take selfies in front of it, grinning like she'd just bagged a trophy buck. I froze the frame, her smug face illuminated by the flashlight's glow, and felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just negligence. This was personal, and I had proof. I clipped the footage and sent it to Levi, the fire marshal, and the HOA board, attaching a brief email. Emergency water tank removed without authorization. Footage shows HOA president coordinating tow at 3 a.m. This is a violation of county fire safety protocols. Immediate action needed. I hit send and leaned back, my coffee going cold in my hand. The evidence was damning, but I knew Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. She'd spin it, twist the narrative, maybe even play the victim. I had to be ready for that, which meant rallying the neighborhood before she could get ahead of the story. I grabbed my keys and headed out to talk to Rosa, my neighbor across the street. Rosa Garcia was a single mom with 2 kids and a no-nonsense attitude that made her the perfect ally. She'd been one of the first to sign off on the tank, even offering to store extra hoses in her garage. Her house was a cozy bungalow with a wildflower garden that Karen had once tried to shut down for non-compliance. Rosa had fought back and won, which made her a bit of a local legend. When I knocked on her door, she answered in sweatpants and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. "Jake, what's going on?" she said, reading the tension on my face. "You look like you're about to punch something." "They took the tank," I said, my voice tight. "Karen had it towed yesterday while I was at the station. I've got footage, but we need to move fast. There's smoke up north, and without that water, we're sitting ducks." Rosa's eyes widened, then narrowed. "She did what?" she said, stepping onto her porch and closing the door so her kids wouldn't hear. I showed her the violation notice and played the security footage on my phone. By the time Karen's selfie flashed across the screen, Rosa was practically vibrating with anger. "That woman," she said, her voice low and dangerous, "is going to get us all killed." "What's the plan?" "We need to get the neighborhood on board," I said. "I've sent the footage to the county and the HOA, but Karen's got connections. She'll try to bury this unless we make it public. I'm thinking we draft a petition, demand an emergency meeting, and call her out. But we need evidence more than just the video." Rosa nodded, already pulling out her phone. "I'll text Elaine and Mr. Thompson. They'll want in on this. And I bet Doug's got some dirt on Karen from the last board meeting. Let's meet tonight, my place, 7 p.m. Bring everything you've got." I thanked her and headed back home, my mind racing. Rosa was right. We needed a coalition, not just a complaint. Karen had ruled Willow Creek like a petty tyrant for years, fining people for minor infractions, shutting down anything that didn't fit her aesthetic. But this was different. This wasn't about flower beds or mailbox colors. This was about survival, and I was betting most of the neighborhood would see it that way once they knew the truth. By noon, the smoke was more noticeable, a faint gray veil spreading across the horizon. My phone buzzed with texts from neighbors, people I hadn't heard from in weeks. "Jake, is the fire close? Should we be worried? Where's that tank you showed us last month?" Each message was a stab of guilt. I'd promised them protection, a safety net for when the flames came. Now, thanks to Karen, that net was gone, and I didn't have answers. I replied as best I could, keeping it vague, working on it. "Stay alert. I'll update soon." But the truth was, I didn't know where the tank was. The tow company wouldn't talk to me without HOA approval, and the city impound yard had no record of it at first, claiming it was logged as abandoned equipment. The whole thing was a bureaucratic nightmare, and every dead end made me angrier. I spent the afternoon digging deeper. I called Levi again, who told me the county was launching an inquiry but needed more documentation. "This is a mess, Jake," he said. "The fire marshal's pissed, but we can't move without a paper trail. Can you get me the tow receipt or the impound log?" I promised to try, though I had no idea where to start. Next, I pulled up the HOA's online portal, a clunky website Karen used to post meeting minutes and fine notices. Most of it was fluff, updates about the annual picnic, reminders to trim hedges, but I was looking for something specific, proof that Karen had acted alone. HOA bylaws required a board vote for any major action, like removing property. If she towed the tank without approval, she'd violated her own rules. It took an hour of scrolling through poorly scanned PDFs, but I hit gold. The minutes from the last 3 board meetings. Not a single mention of the tank, my property, or any emergency equipment. Karen had gone rogue, bypassing the board entirely. I downloaded the files and sent them to Levi, along with a note, "No board authorization for tow." This was her call. But the real bombshell came when I checked my email. Rosa had forwarded me a thread she'd found in the HOA's shared drive, buried in a folder labeled Correspondence. It was a chain between Karen and someone named Dennis, marked as a city liaison. I vaguely remembered Dennis, some cousin of the mayor's, a guy who showed up to community events in ill-fitting suits and too much cologne. Their exchange was a masterclass in arrogance. Karen's first email, sent the morning of the tow, read, "Tank issue resolved." Had it towed under aesthetic compliance. No need to inform full board. Justify if needed. Water hazard plus improper permits. Dennis replied within minutes. "Nice work. I'll smooth it with the city. Label as construction waste if they call." I read it twice, my blood boiling. Construction waste? A county-approved emergency asset? This wasn't just Karen being petty. This was sabotage, plain and simple. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was protecting her image, and Dennis was her enabler. I forwarded the thread to Levi, Rosa, and the fire marshal, my fingers shaking as I typed. This is proof of intentional interference, I wrote. She knew the tank was for fire safety and lied to cover her tracks. Levi called me back almost immediately. Jake, this is bad, he said, his voice tight. You've got evidence of suppression here, not just the tank, but a pattern of blocking readiness infrastructure. This could turn legal fast. Keep pushing. Legal or not, I was done playing nice. Karen's actions weren't just a power grab. They were a betrayal of every person in Willow Creek. I printed the email thread, the meeting minutes, and stills from the security footage, stuffing them into a folder. If Karen wanted a fight, she was going to get one, and I was bringing receipts. That evening, Rosa's living room was packed. She'd rounded up Elaine, Mr. Thompson, Doug, and a few others, 10 of us in total, squeezed onto couches and folding chairs. The mood was electric, a mix of outrage and determination. Rosa passed around coffee and cookies, but no one was here for snacks. I laid out the folder, walking them through the footage, the emails, and the missing board approval. When I got to Karen's selfie with the tank, Elaine let out a low whistle. She's unhinged, she said. Who does that during a fire season? Mr. Thompson, a wiry 72-year-old with a voice like gravel, leaned forward. She rejected my fire escape ladder last year, he said. Said it was non-compliant. I'm on the second floor, Jake. What am I supposed to do, jump? Elaine chimed in, her voice sharp. She fined me for sandbags during that flash flood. Said they were a tripping hazard. My hallway was underwater, and she didn't care. The stories poured out, each one a testament to Karen's reign of terror. Doug, a quiet guy who'd only moved in 6 months ago, admitted he'd stopped going to HOA meetings because Karen shut down every suggestion he made. I proposed a fire break along the north fence, he said. She called it a hypothetical expense and tabled it. Now look where we are. Rosa took charge, her voice cutting through the chatter. We need a petition, she said. An emergency vote to remove her as president. She's not just annoying, she's dangerous. Jake's got the evidence, but we need signatures. Every house on this block, every person who's fed up. We present it to the board, force a meeting, and end this. Everyone nodded, and we got to work. Rosa drafted the petition on her laptop, a single page demanding Karen's removal for endangering the community through negligence and unauthorized actions. I added a summary of the tank incident, citing the county's approval and the fire marshal's warning. By 9 p.m., we had a plan. Rosa and I would go door to door the next day, collecting signatures and handing out copies of the evidence. Elaine would post a call to action on the neighborhood's private Facebook group, carefully worded to avoid Karen's wrath. Mr. Thompson offered to talk to the older residents, the ones who rarely left their homes, but still had a vote. Doug volunteered to dig into the HOA's financial records, looking for any other shady moves Karen might have made. As we wrapped up, Rosa handed me one of Karen's flyers, left on her doorstep that morning. It was for her Green Lawn Gala, a self-congratulatory event to celebrate eco-conscious landscaping, and her role as the Water Ethics Ambassador. Tucked between paragraphs about drought-tolerant lavender and bug-repelling flower beds was a line that made my stomach turn. Let's keep our neighborhood beautiful and tank-free. She'd even made it rhyme, like some twisted Dr. Seuss villain. Rosa's eyes blazed as she pointed to it. She's bragging, she said. While we're watching the sky turn orange, she's throwing a party. The irony was sickening. Karen, who flooded her lawn nightly despite water restrictions, was preaching conservation while sabotaging our fire preparedness. I folded the flyer and tucked it into my folder. It was another piece of the puzzle, another nail in her coffin. But what bothered me most wasn't the gala itself, it was the timing. Hosting a party during a fire advisory wasn't just tone deaf. It felt like a distraction, a way to keep the neighborhood focused on her ego while the real threat closed in. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking the weather alerts, watching the fire's progress on a county map Levi had sent me. The blaze was moving southeast, faster than expected, and our zone was now marked as heightened risk. My phone buzzed with another text from a neighbor. "Jake, any word on the tank?" I didn't reply. What could I say? That our HOA president had turned our safety net into construction waste? That we might have to evacuate because of her? Instead, I pulled up the HOA's bylaws, skimming for anything we could use against her. Section 7, Clause 4. The president shall not undertake unilateral actions affecting community property or safety without board consent. Bingo. Karen had broken her own rules, and we were going to make her pay for it. The next morning, the haze was thicker, the air sharp with the scent of smoke. I met Rosa at her place, and we hit the streets, knocking on doors and handing out packets with the evidence. Most neighbors were shocked, some angry, a few scared. "I thought the tank was still there," said Mrs. Lee, a retired teacher who lived 3 houses down. "Why would she do this?" I explained as best I could, keeping my tone steady despite the urge to rant. By noon, we had 20 signatures, more than enough for a quorum. But we kept going, determined to make the petition undeniable. Then Karen spotted us. She was in her front yard, setting up for her gala, a pastel visor shielding her eyes as she directed a pair of college kids stringing lights across her trellis. She saw us coming down the street, packets in hand, and her face twisted into a scowl. She marched toward us, her flip-flops slapping the pavement like gunshots. "Jake," she screeched, loud enough to make a dog bark. "Are you distributing unauthorized materials? That's solicitation. I'll have you fined." I held up a packet, my voice calm but firm. "Just some light reading for the board, Karen. Meeting minutes, emails, footage. You know, stuff that's supposed to be public anyway." Her eyes narrowed, and for a split second, I saw something flicker across her face, fear, maybe, or realization. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by her usual venom. "You're trying to smear me," she said, her voice dripping with accusation. "This is a personal vendetta." I didn't flinch. "Karen, it became personal the moment you put this neighborhood in danger to protect your ego." I turned to Rosa, who was glaring at Karen like she was ready to tackle her. "Let's keep moving," I said. Karen huffed, tripping over a sprinkler hose as she stormed back to her yard, the universe giving her a small but satisfying stumble. By evening, we had 30 signatures, a groundswell of support that felt like a tidal wave. The Facebook group was buzzing, with neighbors sharing stories of Karen's overreach, fines for kids' chalk drawings, rejected fence repairs, even a ban on holiday lights for being too festive. But the real game changer was the footage. Elaine had uploaded a clipped version to the group, blurred just enough to avoid legal trouble, but clear enough to show Karen's flashlight waving, selfie-taking glory. The comments exploded. "Is this for real? She needs to go. What if the fire hits us?" Doug, true to his word, found a budget report showing Karen had blocked 4 fire prep proposals, including a sprinkler system for the community entrance. She'd called them wasteful while funneling HOA dues into her gala. As I walked home, the sky was a bruised mix of gray and orange, the fire's glow pulsing in the distance. My phone buzzed with a text from Levi, a county map showing the fire's projected path. If the winds held, we'd be in its trajectory by sunrise. I needed the tank back, and I needed it now. But more than that, I needed Karen out of power. She wasn't just a nuisance, she was a liability, a walking disaster who'd rather let our homes burn than admit she was wrong. The petition was our first step, but it wouldn't be the last. Karen had started this fire, and I was going to make sure she felt the heat. The night was thick with tension, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your heart pound even when you're standing still. It was Saturday in Willow Creek, and the wildfire that had been a distant smudge on the horizon was now a real threat, its orange glow pulsing over the northern hills like a heartbeat. I'm Jake Tanner, an off-duty firefighter who'd spent the last 2 days fighting a different kind of battle, one against Karen Mitchell, the HOA president who towed a 4,000-gallon emergency water tank from my backyard because it didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. That tank was our lifeline, a county-approved asset meant to protect our neighborhood from the flames that were now closing in. Thanks to Karen's ego, it was gone, sitting in some impound yard while smoke choked the sky. But I wasn't done yet. With the help of neighbors like Rosa, I'd gathered evidence, rallied support, and drafted a petition to oust Karen. Tonight, we were taking the fight to the next level, getting the tank back no matter what it took. The air smelled of dry wood and danger, a crackling scent that every firefighter knows too well. I stood on my porch, my phone buzzing with weather alerts and texts from neighbors. Jake, the fire's getting closer. What's the plan? Is the tank really gone? Should we pack up? Each message was a reminder of the promise I'd made to keep Willow Creek safe and the betrayal of that promise by Karen's reckless power grab. The county's fire map showed the blaze moving southeast, faster than expected, with winds pushing it toward us. We were in the yellow zone, one step from mandatory evacuation, and without the tank, our defenses were pitiful. Sprinklers and garden hoses wouldn't cut it against a wildfire. We needed that water, and we needed it now. I'd spent the day with Rosa, collecting signatures for our petition to remove Karen from the HOA board. We had 30 so far, more than enough to force an emergency meeting, and the neighborhood was buzzing with outrage. Karen's midnight tow job, captured on my security camera, had gone viral in our private Facebook group, her flashlight waving, selfie-taking arrogance fueling a fire of its own. But signatures and social media weren't enough. The fire was real, and it didn't care about our paperwork. I called Levi, my contact at the county's wildfire readiness program, and asked for the tank's location. He'd been tracking it through the impound system, a maze of bureaucracy that made my head spin. It's at County Lot 7, outskirts of town, he said, his voice grim. Technically off-limits to civilians without clearance. But Jake, you're not exactly a civilian. Call Reggie. He owes you one. Reggie was an old firehouse buddy who now worked logistics for the county. He was the kind of guy who could get things done, no questions asked, as long as you didn't expect him to follow protocol. I dialed his number, my stomach nodding as the phone rang. Jake, you crazy bastard, he answered, his voice warm despite the hour. What's this about a tank? I laid it out, the tow, Karen's sabotage, the fire bearing down. He didn't hesitate. You've got 20 minutes, he said. Lot 7's quiet, after hours. Gates half busted, lock's a joke. Get there before midnight and don't get caught. I'll make sure my guy's grabbing snacks. I grabbed Rosa, who was already waiting at her place, her pickup truck idling in the driveway. She didn't blink when I told her the plan. Let's do this, she said, tossing me a flashlight and a pair of work gloves. We hitched my trailer to her truck, the same one I'd used to haul the tank in, and tore out of Willow Creek, the streets eerily quiet under the smoky haze. Lot 7 was a 15-minute drive, a sprawling gravel yard surrounded by chain link and barbed wire. It was where the county stashed everything from impounded cars to construction equipment, a graveyard of forgotten things. The gate was ajar, just like Reggie said, the lock dangling like a broken toy. We rolled in, headlights off, and scanned the lot. There it was in the far corner, the tank, covered in a dusty tarp labeled impounded equipment. Seeing it like that, discarded like junk, made my blood boil. This wasn't just steel and water. It was our survival. We worked fast. Rosa handled the winch while I secured the straps, the trailer groaning under the tank's weight. Reggie's friend, a utility worker who conveniently wandered off for a snack break, gave us 15 minutes of privacy. The tank was heavier than I remembered, its bulk resisting every pull, but we weren't leaving without it. By 12:45 a.m., it was loaded, and we were back on the road, the trailer rattling behind us. My heart was pounding, Not from fear of getting caught, but from the sheer adrenaline of taking back what was ours. Rosa grinned as we hit the highway. "Karen's gonna lose her mind," she said, and I couldn't help but laugh. It felt good, like we were finally fighting back. We pulled into my driveway just past 1 a.m., the neighborhood dark except for a few porch lights. I backed the trailer into the backyard, right where the tank belonged, and Rosa jumped out to help with the setup. We reconnected the emergency hoses, checked the pressure valves, and locked the placement bracket. It wasn't perfect. Some of the fittings were misaligned, and we didn't have time to test the flow, but it would hold. The tank stood tall, its steel surface catching the glow of a streetlight, a silent sentinel ready to do its job. I stepped back, wiping sweat from my forehead, and felt a surge of relief. We'd done it. The tank was back. Then headlights cut through the darkness. An SUV rolled up slowly, its engine humming like a predator stalking prey. I knew that car, Karen's pristine white Lexus, the one she washed twice a week. She stepped out, barefoot in silk pajamas, her face a mask of fury. "You brought it back," she shouted, her voice piercing the quiet night. "This is illegal. This is theft." She marched toward the tank, her hands balled into fists, as if she could single-handedly drag it away. I stepped in front of her, my voice low but firm. "Karen, walk away. This tank's county property, and it's staying right here." She ignored me, reaching for the valve controls, but I'd planned for this. The night before, I'd padlocked the main valve, a precaution born of paranoia. She yanked at the handle, her face reddening when it didn't budge. "You can't do this," she screamed, spinning to face me. "I'll have you arrested." Before I could respond, a siren wailed in the distance, growing louder. Red and blue lights flashed as a county emergency vehicle pulled up behind her SUV. Lieutenant Baker stepped out, a grizzled firefighter I'd worked with on countless calls. He walked past Karen, his eyes locking onto the tank, then me. "Jake," he said, his voice steady. "This the unit from the Wildfire prep program?" I nodded. "Back where it belongs." "Good," he said, glancing at Karen, who was practically vibrating with rage. "We just updated the suppression route. This tank's part of the backup line now." He turned to her, his expression hardening. "Ma'am, if you interfere with fire deployment again, I'll have to cite you for obstruction during an emergency declaration. I suggest you go home." Karen opened her mouth, her face a mix of shock and defiance, but Baker's stare shut her down. She slammed her car door and peeled out, tires squealing as she disappeared down the street. The silence that followed was sweeter than any victory speech. A few neighbors had come out, drawn by the commotion, their robes and slippers a testament to the late hour. Rosa caught my eye and smiled. "Now that," she said, "was worth waiting for." I looked at the tank, solid and proud, and finally let myself breathe. It was back, and this time, no clipboard-wielding tyrant was going to touch it. But the fight wasn't over. By dawn, the fire was no longer a distant threat. It had sharpened into a violent orange wall, snarling with the wind, devouring the hills just beyond our neighborhood. The alert came through every channel: county, state, emergency radio, evacuation recommended for surrounding zones. Willow Creek upgraded to immediate concern. I stood in my backyard, watching smoke roll in like a tide, my phone buzzing with a text from Levi. "It's happening. We need your tank now." Fire crews flooded the neighborhood within minutes. Trucks roared into every corner, hoses coiled, nozzles primed, radios crackling with orders. I guided a crew to the tank, my heart swelling as they hooked up to the dual outlet system I'd maintained myself. Water surged through industrial-grade hoses, spraying over rooftops and hedges, creating a damp perimeter. The captain, a wiry guy named Torres, gave me a nod. "You saved us hours, Jake," he said. "This might turn the tide." The neighborhood erupted into controlled chaos. Families packed cars, grabbing pets and documents. Rosa took charge of the elderly, loading them into vehicles with oxygen tanks and overnight bags. Elaine set up a first aid station in her garage, her nurses' training kicking in. It was the kind of unity you only see when the stakes are life or death, a reminder that even HOA feuds couldn't break us when it mattered most. But one person hadn't gotten the memo: Karen. I was helping a crew direct water flow when I heard screaming over the engine noise. This is a violation. This entire setup is unauthorized. I turned to see Karen storming down the street, barefoot in a pink velour tracksuit, flailing her arms like a furious traffic cone. A firefighter tried to intercept her, but she dodged him, making a beeline for the tank. My stomach dropped as she reached for the valve, the same one she'd tried to sabotage hours ago. "Karen," I shouted, my voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't you touch that." She didn't stop. She grabbed the valve handle and yanked, her face twisting when it didn't move. The padlock held firm, a small but crucial victory. Her audacity, trying to disrupt an active fire response, was surreal. A second firefighter, a young guy with the patience of a saint, stepped in and restrained her gently. "Ma'am," he said, "you're interfering with emergency suppression efforts. Step back, or you'll be detained." Karen screamed about bylaws, property rights, and how she never approved this abomination. Her voice was drowned out by a helicopter overhead, dropping retardant on the hillside. The fire wasn't just a fire anymore, it was a war, and she was trying to unplug the cannons. Lieutenant Baker returned, pulling her aside. He spoke calmly, but she waved her hands, her face reddening until she finally went limp, defeated. A deputy escorted her home, her tracksuit a stark contrast to the soot and chaos around her. The fire hit the back slope of our neighborhood with a sound I'll never forget, a tearing, crackling howl, like the world was splitting open. Embers rained over rooftops, trees hissing as heat vaporized their sap. The crews responded instantly, hoses arcing water, firefighters shouting orders. I ran to help a younger firefighter carry a hose to Rose's backyard, where her wood fence was smoldering. We doused it just in time, the water hissing as it met the heat. For 3 hours, it was brutal, non-stop work containing, redirecting, defending. The tank ran hot, then empty, then refilled with a city bypass truck. Without it, our side of the neighborhood would have been defenseless, and everyone knew it. By mid-afternoon, the crews had stabilized the perimeter. Charred brush and blackened fences marked the boundary, but not a single house was lost. Captain Torres called it a miracle, born of preparation and rapid response. He asked to take a photo with the tank and the volunteers, all of us covered in soot, smiling like we'd just won a championship. The tank gleamed behind us, a quiet hero. Then the news vans arrived, their cameras hungry for a story. Word had spread. An HOA had removed emergency equipment, only to need it days later to save the very homes they'd tried to beautify. Karen's house appeared in a B-roll shot, her melted garden decorations and deflated gala balloons a fitting backdrop. Reporters cornered me, and I gave them the facts: calm, verifiable, devastating. Karen tried to interrupt one segment, but a city official stopped her, his voice loud enough for the cameras. "You're under investigation for obstructing emergency resources. Get legal counsel." She didn't scream this time. She just walked to her porch, sat down, and stared, her eyes hollow. Neighbors passed by with water and towels, but no one stopped. Not out of cruelty, but because we'd all seen what selfishness looked like when it wore the mask of leadership. The fire had scorched more than trees, it had burned away Karen's lies, and we were done pretending. As the sun dipped below the smoke-streaked horizon, I looked at the tank, still standing, still ready. We'd won this round, but the war wasn't over. Karen was down, but not out, and I knew she'd fight back. But so would we, and this time we had the truth and the tank on our side. The morning after the wildfire was contained, Willow Creek woke to an eerie stillness. No leaf blowers hummed, no HOA golf carts cruised with their clipboards, not even the usual chorus of barking dogs broke the silence. The only sounds were the soft rustle of ash drifting off rooftops and the occasional drip of water from scorched gutters. It wasn't the quiet of fear, it was awe, the kind that settles over a place that's stared down disaster and survived. I'm Jake Tanner, the off-duty firefighter who'd fought to bring a 4,000-gallon water tank to our neighborhood, only to have it towed by Karen Mitchell, the HOA president who valued her perfect lawn over our safety. That tank had saved us, feeding hoses that held back the flames, and now it stood in my backyard like a steel monument to what we'd overcome. But the fight wasn't just against the fire. It was against Karen's arrogance, her sabotage, and a system that let her wield power unchecked. Today, we were finishing what we'd started. I spent the early hours inspecting the tank, running maintenance checks, and logging stats for the fire crews. It had performed like a champ, supplying 6 hoses, assisting 2 ladder units, and sustaining spray coverage for nearly 3 hours before needing a refill. A city technician stopped by, clipboard in hand, asking if I'd let them do a case study on how private preparedness units could integrate with public response. Happy to, I said, as long as you include the part where the HOA tried to sabotage it. He chuckled, but I wasn't joking. Karen's actions weren't just a footnote, they were the story, a cautionary tale of what happens when ego trumps survival. Karen, meanwhile, had gone quiet. Her white Lexus sat in her driveway, untouched, but no one had seen her since the fire crews left. A county notice was duct taped to her door, a citation for interfering with emergency operations. Below it, Rosa had slipped our petition, now covered in nearly every neighbor's signature, demanding her removal as HOA president. It was a public shaming, but it felt right. She'd endangered us all, and the neighborhood deserved to know who was leading them. By lunchtime, the HOA called an emergency board meeting at the community center. The place was packed with people who hadn't attended a meeting in years, showed up with folding chairs and coffee mugs, ready to witness the end of Karen's reign. I walked in with Rosa, Elaine, and Mr. Thompson, our folder of evidence tucked under my arm. The air buzzed with anticipation, like a courtroom before a verdict. Karen arrived late, sunglasses on, her face stiff as she clutched a binder like a shield. But there was no salvaging her image, not after the fire, not after the footage of her posing with the towed tank, not after her screaming fit during an active fire response. The board didn't waste time. Rosa stood, her voice steady as she read the charges, the unauthorized tow, the email thread with Dennis, the city liaison, the blocked fire prep proposals, the interference with emergency operations. She held up the security footage stills, each one a dagger. When she finished, Mr. Thompson rose, his 72-year-old frame trembling with resolve. "Is there any reason," he said, "why someone who endangered this entire community should still represent us?" The room was silent, every eye on Karen. She didn't fight back. She muttered something about misunderstandings and good intentions, but her words were hollow, like a script she didn't believe. The vote was unanimous. Karen was removed as president, effective immediately, and barred from holding HOA office for 5 years. She stood, her binder clutched to her chest, and walked out without a word. The room didn't erupt in cheers. It wasn't that kind of victory. Instead, there was a slow, steady applause, the sound of relief and resolve. People shook hands, hugged, made plans for a community cleanup. Rosa was named interim president, and her first act was to form an emergency preparedness committee. She asked me to chair it. I agreed, but only if we focused on infrastructure, not rules. No more fighting over garden gnomes while ignoring what kept us alive. That weekend, the tank was officially certified as an emergency asset. The city sent a laminated placard declaring it a sanctioned wildfire response unit, but I didn't want to mount it alone. I invited the neighborhood to help, and they showed up in droves, kids with paint cans, adults with tools, even Mrs. Lee with a tray of homemade cookies. We turned the tank into a symbol of resilience, painting flames doused by waves, a phoenix rising from ash, and in bold letters along the side, "This tank saves homes." Lucy, a sharp 10-year-old from down the street, brought a scrap of wood from her backyard and asked to make a sign. We helped her carve, "Try towing this now, Karen." It was a joke, but it got laughs, and someone nailed it to a nearby fence post. That sign became a neighborhood legend, a cheeky reminder of our victory. Even the fire crew, back for a follow-up, stopped to snap a photo with it. A few weeks later, the city held a recognition event, honoring Willow Creek for our volunteer response. I was handed a plaque, but the real reward was watching my neighbors, people who'd once stayed silent out of fear, stand tall, sharing their stories with reporters and officials. Rosa spoke about the petition, Elaine about the first aid station, Mr. Thompson about the community's grit. No more whispers, no more hiding from Karen's clipboard. We'd found our voice, and it was loud. Karen moved out 3 months later. Her house sat empty for a while, the for sale sign a quiet admission of defeat. When new owners arrived, they repainted the shutters and joined Rosa's committee within a week. No one mentioned Karen by name anymore, not out of spite, but because she'd become irrelevant. She'd made herself a symbol of resistance to progress, and progress had won. Her legacy was a cautionary tale, whispered in other HOAs, a warning of what happens when you prioritize control over community. The tank stayed put, anchored and reinforced, a fixture in our emergency plan. During the next fire season, it was the first resource listed for our area. Other neighborhoods took notice, installing their own tanks and calling me for setup tips. Levi told me the county was eyeing a statewide grant to incentivize them, a ripple effect from our fight. Sometimes, I'd sit on my porch at dusk, watching the sun sink behind the blackened hills, the scars of that blaze a reminder of how close we'd come to disaster. The air was cooler now, the neighborhood alive with new energy, people working together, checking on each other, knowing what could have happened. Every so often, someone would pause by the tank, maybe smile or give it a little salute. It wasn't just steel anymore. It was a testament to what we'd built from the ashes of Karen's mistakes. We'd faced a fire that could have destroyed us, not just in flames, but in division, and we'd come out stronger. The tank was our anchor, but the real victory was the community it forged, one that valued preparedness over perfection, unity over ego, truth over lies. And so, as the stars blinked on above Willow Creek, I'd look at that tank and think about the fight it took to keep it here. It wasn't just about water or wildfires. It was about standing up to those who'd rather see us burn than admit they're wrong. Karen thought she could control us, but she forgot one thing. A neighborhood isn't just houses and lawns. It's people, bound by trust, ready to fight for each other when the sky glows orange. We learned that lesson the hard way, and we'd never forget it. The tank wasn't going anywhere, and neither were we. Let the next fire come, we were ready, and no one, not even a clipboard warrior, would ever take that from us again.